what's up? It's me, Sonita, back with another video, and I have another guest. You may remember her. Her name is Amber, and she is one of my very, very best friends from Penn, and she is joining us today for another conversation about grad school and PhD. What's up, Amber?
Hey, Sonita, thanks so much for having me back. And hey, scholarnoire fam.
Yeah. So today's topic that Amber and I have gotten together and discussed that would be really helpful for other folks who are either interested in going to grad school to do research abroad or already in the process or already abroad is doing research abroad. Like how to do it, when do you start coming up with these ideas? What is it like once you reach your location? How do you manage everything? Will be answered today. Can you just tell people a little bit about yourself, what you're studying, your location, etc.?
Sure. So I'm interested in the ways that countries recovering from war and violence use tourism as a mechanism for development and rebranding in the aftermath of that conflict. So specifically, I'm working in Colombia, which has the longest internal conflict in the Western Hemisphere, over 52 years. And as an anthropologist, I'm studying that process not through, tourism, cruise ship embarkings, or international festivals that are happening.
Right.
The way that I choose to kind of enter this question is through a group of female street vendors who, over the past 40 years, have become reconfigured into the living icon of Colombia at the very same time that the city of Cartagena has become rebranded as a tourism epicenter of the nation. So my project is essentially about the parallel processes of transforming people and transforming spaces in what is this kind of post peace accord moment in Colombia, which is 2016 beyond.
Awesome. And that is a wonderful and amazing project. Amber, you have been working on this literally since the first year of grad school because Amber and I were roommates and we talked about our project. And I remember she pulled out this humongous book and was like, this is my project. And she was flipping pages and she had all these artifacts, articles, I think dolls, all of these collectibles centered around these women who, and maybe I can put up a photograph now, these women who are configured in the consciousness as this sort of like Chiquita banana, a brown skinned woman wearing a colorful dress with a fruit basket on her head. And that those are the women who Amber has gotten to know intimately and is studying and is going to be producing a really brilliant piece of work about very soon. So you are in basically your final year of graduate school, correct?
Yes,
Almost
I am.
Final year, almost done.
Yes, I am dissertating, which means that I am in the process of writing my 6-chapter dissertation, which will be the completed written work, and that is the capstone of my doctoral thesis.
Yes, exactly. And where are you right now in this gorgeous, airy location wearing this this verdant blouse?
So right now I'm coming to you all from Cartagena, Colombia, which is the capital of the Department of Bolivar on the northwest coast of Colombia. It's also the tourism epicenter of the country and has been that way since the early 1900s. So I have a multi-sided project where I work both within this urban center, and then I also work within a rural village that's about 2 hours inland from here. That's called San Basilio de Palenque. I'll tell you all more about that soon. So I really thought it was important in my work to not only do my research in an isolated kind of remote location, but to also think about the ways that more contemporary processes such as global tourism, mass communication, travel, and these processes of mass media too come to head. So that's why I'm working both in the city and then in a rural location.
Awesome. So let's begin at the beginning. Tell me, how did you first become interested in Colombia for your research and this group of women and Cartagena and the Palenque people specifically as your subject and the women?
Yeah, so there are very few times where people can pinpoint a moment where they first became interested in this work. It's often kind of like the musings of many years. For me, there is one specific moment, and I have to always give thanks to my academic mom, Dr. Kim Butler, who was a professor of Africana Studies and History at Rutgers University. So I was an undergrad at Rutgers. I took this amazing course on African diaspora studies, and I really learned about this space called the Black Atlantic, right? The idea that all throughout the Circum-Caribbean, there are folks of color living and having similar experiences, although they're always shaped by the culture from which they emerge. So my professor, Kim Butler, took me to this course, the African Diaspora. And as I was graduating, I knew that I wanted to pursue a PhD program. I was a McNair scholar, so I was already really attuned to the very small number of professors of color that exist in the US. So I knew I wanted to be among that small group of Black professors. But I didn't know what I wanted my research project to be. And one thing about applying to grad school is that more important even than your master's degree is your ability to show that you can do a research project. I came into the PhD program at Penn without having a master's because I was able to show that I had the ability to carry a research project. So my professor, Kim Butler, sat down with me and I said, after I graduate from undergrad, I'd like to do something working with the African diaspora in Latin America. I was thinking about Panamanians of West Indian descent or the Dominican Republic. And Kim Butler said to me, why don't you think about Colombia? In Colombia, there is a group called San Basilio de Palenque, where people celebrate their African heritage every year through a drum festival. And I hadn't learned it yet, but I would come to know that Colombia has the third highest percentage of African diasporic people anywhere outside of Africa. So first is Brazil, next is the US, and third is Colombia. So I applied to a Fulbright program, we'll get into that in a moment, to come to Colombia as an English teacher. And I then developed that into the dissertation project out of all the things that I witnessed as a PhD scholar. So the moment of incubation was speaking with my professor, Dr. Kim Butler, learning about San Basilio de Palenque, and then coming to Cartagena to teach English, and later developing that into a research project.
And I want to remark upon what you mentioned about the fact that Colombia has the third highest number of Black folks outside of Africa, because the image that the media and Hollywood has served of us, of Colombia, is so far from that. And even many of us who can think of very famous Colombian celebrities, almost none of them have even medium brown skin. Colombia is still largely framed as a very white South American country. And that's why part of what your research does is it continues to chip away at these truths that make people who are of African descent feel that there aren't many of us in Latin America or in South America, and that's just not true.
Right, and if we look at the history, it makes so much sense. The three largest empires that really were spearheading colonization in the Americas are the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the British, right? And for the Portuguese, the hub was Salvador de Bahia, which is the largest kind of depository of African descendancy in the Americas. For the United States, we see the British empires emerging, but then for the Spanish Empire, all of the goods, the silver, the gold, the human beings that were trafficked throughout this region, they needed to be kind of corralled in one place so as to avoid the different ransacking of pirates, especially Sir Francis Drake. So Cartagena became the official point of entry and exit for all goods transported through Spain and the New Granada. So Cartagena then becomes the hub and the place where all these enslaved Africans entered the Spanish Empire through that period of the 1600s to 1800s. So, you know, the Cartagena in Colombia as a city, as a country of high Black population, is just a legacy of transatlantic slave trade and colonialism.
So we're talking about Colombia, we're talking about the place, you've expanded a little bit about the history of the African diaspora in that space, but can you talk more about how the specificity of the location of Cartagena shaped your research interests, especially once you arrived to Colombia for the first time?
Right, so my dissertation project is very much a curiosity that came out of being here. right? And I definitely encourage people who are thinking about an area, who are thinking about an issue, you can allow the place to inform the kinds of questions that you will ask. So for me, I came to Cartagena in August 10th of 2010, and I traveled to the village of San Basilio de Palenque. There I was met with women's organizations, women who were doing entrepreneurial activities, forming their own restaurants, hair salons, and businesses. And I was so impressed by the way that the women were leading their own initiatives, completely devoid of any outside influence in terms of NGOs, just really endemic projects from the ground up. I came to Cartagena just days after being in Palenque, and it just so happened that Cartagena was celebrating its independence and coming into Carnival. So right in front of the building where I lived, the bus stop was changed from a normal advertisement to a picture of a Palenquera woman smiling, advertising for a beer company. And that image of a Palenquera was so starkly different from the way that I'd come to see Palenquera women within their village of Palenque, that I immediately became obsessed with finding out whether this was the only representation of Palenquera women like this, or whether this was just a pattern that I was starting to see. And sure enough, as I went into tourism shops, boutiques, restaurants, photo galleries, art galleries, I saw throughout that the representations of Palenquera women were abundant, and that often these women were represented by others, but didn't have very much say in the ways that they were shown. So I became just consumed. I became, really interested in learning what it was like to be in this position, and also the types of fantasies and political imaginations that are tethered to the women as they become peddled off as the poster card of Colombia's most important tourist city.
That's so fascinating. And so you came to Penn, you knew that you were interested in doing this, you had already lived in Colombia, you did a Fulbright as an English teacher. And once you arrived, you knew that you were going to go back to that location. And this is a really important piece for folks who are interested in pursuing graduate school. Oftentimes there is a fight for funding, because usually the package that you're offered isn't enough. Our funding was for 5 years.
Yes.
Yes. So all of the School of Arts and Sciences PhDs at Penn are offered a 5-year package, and then it's up to you to figure out a way to fund the rest of your degree should you need it. And usually for folks who are going abroad, like myself, going to Paris, Amber, who is in Cartagena, and with the Palenque people, it takes longer for lots of reasons that we're going to get into. And so you knew you were going to apply to a fellowship. So what year do you recall embarking on this international fellowship application journey so that you could get there, get on the ground, and continue the ethnographic research that you had already started long term,
Right.
as opposed to just a few weeks?
Right. So as Sonita mentioned, the University of Pennsylvania offers a 5-year funding package, but there are 3 types of external funding grants. One are for students who are still in the coursework period, and that would include things like the Ford Dissertation Fellowship, which is for students who have. Right. So that would include things like the Ford Predoctoral Fellowship, which is for students who have not yet begun fieldwork. And then there are grants for students who are conducting fieldwork. And finally, there are grants for the writing phase. So I embarked on the international fellowship journey in about 2016 and 2017. I have to say that just preparing to apply for fellowships is a full-time job. So that means finding the names, finding the dates and all the requirements. So that began around the end of 2016. And then I applied for fellowships in 2017 and finally was awarded a fellowship and began my year in 2018, 2019. Yeah. So it's a 1-year journey to complete the fellowship and then begin the award.
Now let's talk a little bit about what that process looks like, because as I've mentioned before in my videos, various videos about successfully obtaining a Fulbright grant, Amber also successfully obtained a Fulbright research grant abroad, but there are many, many fellowships. And so some of the things that you are asked to include in an application package, they tend to be the same more or less. It's going to ask for information such as your coursework at graduate school, perhaps in undergrad as well, your GPA, any awards that you've won, presentations that you've done, as well as a research proposal, right? So can you talk a little bit about what they ask for in these research proposals, Amber? And not just Fulbright, because here's the thing about Fulbright that's very, very specific. It's very short. Fulbright is like, listen, you got 2 pages, do it. But the other applications that I filled out wanted much longer proposals. I believe maybe 10 pages double spaced was the longest that I was asked to submit. I don't remember which one that was, but usually you have a lot more space to make your case. But what would you include in a research proposal for dissertation research work abroad, Amber?
So I would share something that is definitely the most salient way that anyone has ever described to me applying to external fellowships. And that was by Danilyn Rutherford, the president of the Wennergren Foundation. And what she said is that you can say to anyone how exciting your project is, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, it's your baby. Right. You have to explain to someone whose baby it is not why they should care about the expediency, the urgency, and the importance of your project, as well as how it's going to contribute to the larger body of knowledge. So it involves a skill of articulating a version of yourself that shows how you're positioned to carry out this research and why no one else but you can carry it out in this way that is so important. So the Fulbright application, for example, asks for a version of your past talents and histories and experiences that will show how you're genuinely equipped to do this work. So that includes language capabilities, networks, to show that you're not just arriving in the country and that you're going to have to make connections, but that you can already kind of slide into existing networks that are both professional and personal and allow you to access the types of resources on the ground. That was extremely important with Fulbright because Fulbright asks for letters of affiliation with people that will show that they can already support and facilitate your research on the ground. What else is involved in the Fulbright application? We really have to talk about how answering this small question through rigorous methodological qualitative research will help to answer larger questions about social existence and these kind of global processes that are happening in larger spaces. So I'm interested in tourism as a process of political fantasies and also myth making that allows spaces to be remade in moments of post-conflict. So an application is really the place where we have to unite person and project and show how we're perfectly fitted to do that kind of work.
That's an amazing description. Thank you so much for saying that, Amber, because that's what I'm constantly trying to impress when I do videos or when I work on people one-on-one, or the work that I did while I was at Penn helping students, is you have to explain why it's not just the project, it's also you who's amazing for this. What is it about your background that has uniquely qualified you to do this work? Now, the thing about both of us is we had both already spent time in the country that we wanted to go back to do our research. So I was able to say, having lived there, I already have a command of the language. It's also a special place to me for these specific reasons. But most of it needs to be the meat and potatoes of this is what research means. I get what research means. I get what it means to make a theoretical contribution. I understand the work that it takes to actually conduct and analyze and write up research. And this is why you should select me. Really quickly, because we are in different disciplines, I would love for you to talk a little bit about what ethnographic research means for anthropologists.
Right, so ethnographic research is the method of gathering data that sociocultural anthropologists use, which is the field of anthropology that really depends on or derives its information from interactions with living human beings in their everyday lives and contexts. So for that, ethnography means often spending time with people and coming as close as possible to experiencing their lives alongside them, which means, you know, the types of food that they eat, the types of entertainment that they consume, the type of, you know, recreational activities, the types of transportation that they use, visiting their dwellings, visiting their residential neighborhoods. And the idea is that life doesn't stop at the end of an interview, right? We can have an interview with someone and sit down, they can tell us what they experienced, but it's completely different to get as close as possible to that embodied witnessing, that kind of co-witnessing that happens when we are accompanying someone in their lives, right? Because there are all sorts of things that we would miss. If I'm telling you what my life is like and what my everyday is like, there are all sorts of things that I take for granted because it's normal to me. So it's about looking at another perspective from that position of being what Faye Harrison calls this outsider within. So constantly using that outside perspective, that distance, to be able to see things that are nuanced and new, but then also accompanying people for whom that context is normal in order to have that kind of insider perspective. So what differentiates ethnographic research from other types of research is it's often long-term. Right. It's qualitative, right? So although we can use things like maps and surveys and, you know, kind of closed-ended questions, it very much derives its information from open-ended kind of experience-based knowledge that happens from just, you know, deep hanging out, to use the words of Jafari Allen at Yale University. So we want to just hang out with people, spend time in their context in order to understand what the social condition is like, what the human condition is like. That can include things like walking interviews, like open-ended interviews, like accompanying people to meetings and to sessions and to events where there are a lot of people present, or just hanging out with people in their homes and their everyday lives.
Right. And so with sociology, it's very similar, but there are a couple of differences that I noticed because I read ethnographic studies, books, like famous ones. So the famous ethnographer who was at Penn, I'm not sure if he still is, Philippe Bourgeois, selling crack in El Barrio. He also did a really great ethnographic study of heroin users in the Bay Area. But the training that I got in sociology impressed upon me that sociologists really focus on a much higher number of interviews than anthropologists may. So for example, it was really important that I interviewed at least 50 people for my sociological research study, even though I was doing an ethnography, because numbers are very, very important to sociologists. We consider ourselves, and I don't buy into this stuff, but we consider ourselves to be more scientific, because the more numbers of people that you have, the more valid your research. In addition to that, the time period tends to be much shorter for sociologists. So for anthropologists, they tend to be in the field for a couple of years even. But for sociologists, much shorter studies are normalized, I would say. And as for ethnography, as you mentioned, Amber, it's focused around observing that person in specific environments or groups. And so getting their permission, obviously informed consent is very, very important, getting their permission to allow you into their lives. And that can be as a participant observer, meaning you're hanging out with them, you're doing things with them in their day-to-day lives, or you're just sitting there watching them and maybe they'll talk to you. It's almost like documenting their life, but often without a video camera. So I'm sure there are sometimes people who turn on a video camera and sometimes it does become a documentary, but field notes, right? Writing down lengthy, detailed, meticulous notes of everything you saw is key to ethnography. It's so, so important. And that is also the hardest part about it. Because if you spend a day with someone, do you know how long that would actually take to write up a meticulous account of what that day was and how that went? Now, technology today allows us to take out the notes app and type as we go, or take pictures of artifacts, or even record. And that's what I would do. when I would spend long stretches of time with people, instead of writing everything down immediately because it would take too long, I would sit there and say, this is what happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then when I went back for transcription, it was a lot easier than just sitting there and typing everything out.
Right, absolutely. I think that what you're pointing out, Sonita, is really key, the difference between sociology and anthropology, because both use ethnography. And there's a really great example. There's a book by the name of Vida, Life in the Zone of Social Abandonment by Joe Biel, 2005. It's an ethnography of one person.
Exactly.
Right. So the whole entire book is an ethnography of the life of one woman. And the way that I like to think about the difference between soc and anthropology using ethnography is that if we're thinking about a rural community, for example, the sociologist might, fly over in a helicopter and get an idea of how many houses in that community have running water, how many have the bathroom inside the house or outside the house. What does that say about their social economic status? Where the home's located? What is the income of that household, for example?
Right.
And if we have that outhouse, how many outhouses are in that community? And what does that say about the social strata or the level, the zone of that community? An anthropologist, on the other hand, would go into the community, go into the outhouse, look at the feces, dissect the feces, understand what's in them, speak to people about their daily food practices, and really kind of understand what it's like to live in that community on a day-to-day basis. And it could involve only speaking with 10 people, but you're following those 10 people over, say, 2, 3, 4, or in my case, sometimes 10 years. So I think that what happens with ethnography is that for anthropologists, the field notes become the bread and potatoes. It's what we use to really go back to and understand what we're observing, because as you said, it can't all be documented even through camera or audio, because that's always just a slice of what we're seeing, but we're missing other things. And it's a really difficult balance to strike, to figure out how much to engage in participating in the lives of others, and then the work of witnessing that involves documenting and kind of seeing it for the purpose of recording later on. So it's a kind of artful balance between being with people and then also documenting and understanding their lives as a form of text.
Yeah. That's a great point. I will say, though, I disagree that sociologists wouldn't go in and talk to those people about their toilets. They would do those things. It's always important to understand the broader social context. But that's where it gets tricky, though, because the thing is, no one could ever say about your project that you're not doing that. I mean, your entire dissertation is observing how this socio-political context of the nation state is affecting this group of women, their employment, and then also how they're responding, and they're using their own agency to both resist and negotiate their positionality. So it's there's so much overlap between these two disciplines. If you're trying to decide between which one feels more right to you, I would say that sociology, I actually don't even know. That's a different video.
I would suggest reading a text in anthropology and then reading a text in sociology, even about general similar parts of the world or about similar issues, and to try to say like, I would prefer to go about answering the question in this way or in this way, and then see which of the two fields more typically ask and answer questions using those methods.
Yeah, and I also think there are trends in both disciplines, right? So we know that sociologists tend to focus, in my opinion, overly focus on class. Obviously, there are subfields, and race and gender and intersectionality is becoming increasingly more popular in an interdisciplinary way. But sociologists have a lot of focus on how economics shape our society, and anthropologists might just be more interested in understanding the culture of different people's walks of life, perhaps. So in any case, moving on. How long did you end up staying at your research site? And then how did you find your way into the lives of your research participants? How did you meet them? And did you have a gatekeeper or a person who introduced you to the community?
Yeah. So I ended up staying in my community for exactly 29 months. I came in.
That's so we're clear. That's 2.5 years.
I came in April of 2019, and I left in the fall of 2020, thanks mostly to the pandemic. So
True.
how did I end up, kind of getting into this community? I have to say, and this isn't really talked about, but I think it's part of my own sensibility of being really people-centric, really caring about the way that I build relationships and maintain relationships with people. I had been working on my proposal for so long. And when I came to Cartagena and I was tasked with going into the streets of Cartagena and finding, a Palenquera woman to start speaking with, I was so nervous.
Yeah.
And there was this barrier that I had to overcome with seeing, the people and the topic as these themes and these issues and these, kind of, theoretical ideas that I wanted to grapple with, and then just everyday people in their space. So I remember being extremely nervous about how I was going to make that first interaction. Now, mind you, I did know pepperings of some of these street vendors that I'd met over the years, but I had to really get in. So yes, I do think that there are gatekeepers for me. These are two kinds of gatekeepers. On the one hand, in any type of community, there will always be academics that everyone knows or social leaders that everyone knows.
Yes.
And it's important to speak to these people, but to not only speak to these people.
Right.
Because in speaking with individuals, some of the interlocutors will say, oh, have you spoke to, in my case, Alfonso Cassiani, Teresa Cassiani, Miguel Obeso. And if you haven't spoken to those people, it's kind of like a no-brainer. But these people are also gatekeepers for what? For speeches, for events, for conferences. They'll invite you and make sure that any conversations that are happening on the ground that are related to your work, they'll get you in the know. They'll also invite you to speak at events and just be present in the different spaces where they're working, sometimes, as the foreign researcher, which helps them. So I think that it's important to have gatekeepers that are the go-to well-known academic and activist leaders, as well as people within the everyday space. So for me, those were the veteran street vendors, right? The people who had worked in the city of Cartagena for 40 years. It was really important to access the space through those women because they had the most respect and also had seen the most change throughout the space, the tourism space.
How did you ingratiate yourself into the community? And this is important because, again, when you're doing ethnographic research, your bread and butter is really the human beings whose lives you want to observe. So here's the difficult thing. You're not from the community and you're not of the community. But if you're lucky, you have a distinct connection to the community. So for you, Amber, you are fluent in the language, you've lived there before, and you're a Black woman. Those three things are going to give you significant credentials, hopefully, to these other Black women whose lives you want to examine. But what you want to do is become so regularly present in people's lives that they start to consider you as someone who they can trust beyond just this human being who's there to write about them and then never be seen from or heard from again.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sunita, to think about how to really, get over that barrier where people are able to just act as themselves, even in your presence. So I remember the first kind of general meeting of Palenquera street vendors that was being held while I was here. And the women at first told me not to come. And the reason they told me not to come was because they know that in the meeting, people talk over each other and are catty and there's gossip and things aren't always organized. And they didn't want me to be privy to that kind of not only information, but just like that kind of affective display of, like being an everyday woman, working in an environment. There was a level of hesitance with allowing me to see the kitchen, right? The beyond the scenes of what it really looks like to just be like Palenquera women amongst Palenquera women. Very soon that changed and the women invited me to the meeting. So I was able to be there and, kind of just witness, how the agenda came out and things like that. But this is another thing too. in doing ethnography, it can be very easy to think that we're only on when we're in the working space and when we're doing interviews, but those invitations to people's homes to have dinner over the weekends or over the holidays, or an invitation to a 9-year-old girl's ice skating, I'm sorry, or those invitations to a 9-year-old, or those invitations to a 9-year-old girl, or those invitations to a 9-year-old girl's roller skating competition, for example. I think the most important thing is to embrace opportunities to connect with other human beings on a human level. And that allows us to really just be with them as people and not so much as researchers, and then genuine connections form from those type of interactions that allow us to then be more relaxed. If the only face people ever see of us is the researcher face, then they'll only interact with us in those ways. But by having them in our personal spaces, whether our homes or entering those more intimate spaces of their lives, that's where those barriers really kind of mesh away.
So I want to move on toward some of the challenges that happens, right? You're doing this work, you're figuring it out as you go, but for most people, you are going to be an outsider in many ways. You are an American woman. You spent time there, but Spanish isn't your first language, right? You didn't grow up there. Challenges that you face as an outsider doing this research.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that I faced as an outsider doing this research is that I've been in a really unique position of working with women who are constantly interacting with Americans. So while I was, kind of witnessing and accompanying women in their everyday work within this tourist space, there were constantly Americans that were observing and even speaking to me, asking for me to explain, what was happening, or even translate or to take a picture of me with the women while they're there. And I had the really uncomfortable and difficult double consciousness in a way, but just of both being with women and understanding their work, but then also understanding what it was like for an American tourist.
Yeah.
Who didn't want to pay, who didn't want to pay for a picture, who didn't want to pay for a fruit salad, and had to understand what it was like for the women to negotiate with foreign tourists, sometimes through me, who was asking to understand. So there was one incident where I was accompanying women in their everyday activity of selling fruits on the street and taking pictures. And at the end of giving the tourist the explanation and kind of translating, the person gave me a tip. And it was in part out of my own role as a researcher and understanding the background that I was being seen as like, oh, we want to thank you for your work, but I'm not the person who was working in that incident. So it was really uncomfortable to kind of navigate that. And also, sometimes as a Black woman to be read as a palenquera, or to be spoken to in a way as if I myself was, another palenquera woman bending. So that was one of the really shocking things, to see those differences as both from someone from the United States, but then someone who's accompanying the women, to understand what it's like to both see and then be seen as the palenquera woman from the outside looking in from the foreign perspective.
And that is that auto-ethnographic piece that so many Black women or Black people who are outsiders, oftentimes privileged outsiders, who are coming from the perspective of research, then enter into a space where they're seen as or perceived as or read as one of those people who they have the privilege of getting to know. It's so prevalent, and that makes our research a lot more complicated in our relationship to the people that are helping us complete this project, right? And hopefully we can offer something in return, this information and this knowledge. It is complicated, and but it's also really important. So yeah. All right, I would love to know, what should outsiders really expect when you go abroad to do research? Are there any tips that you would provide or offer to people who want to do this but have no idea what it's going to be like and they're nervous about it?
The first thing to expect when doing research abroad is that things will not be expedient, and things will not always, go smoothly the way that it might if you're working in a controlled environment, either in a
Perfect. That's so wonderful. All right, great. And so just we're gonna play a little game that I call School Us, and you're just gonna give us very quick answers to some questions about what we need to know about the questions I'm going to ask you. So,
let's go.
first question is, what is your favorite scholar who studies Colombia?
My favorite scholar who studies Colombia is Tiana Pashal.
Great. Best music to study to.
Best music to study to is Herencia de Timbiquí.
Favorite thing to do for fun in Colombia.
Favorite thing to do for fun in Colombia would be going to the market and getting fresh juices and then coming back home and making a fresh fruit smoothie.
Okay. Best way to unwind after a stressful day.
Oh, lay in a hammock, inhale some lavender oil, have a stroll in the open air by the bay.
Philly or Brooklyn?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn or Cartagena?
Cartagena.
Oh, shoot, Cartagena. Okay, great. That's it. Thank you so much for schooling us, Amber. Okay, awesome. This has been amazing. Thank y'all so much for watching. Thank you so much, Amber, for joining us and imparting so much wisdom and knowledge. This is going to be an incredible project you've worked so hard in. I can't wait to see it. And of course, once there is a link to the documentary, I'm going to drop the link underneath the YouTube video.
Thanks
you
so
much.
Love is conditional. So
right. Yes.
it may be.
Okay, cool.
Just so that you know, this is what it's real life to be friends with Sonita. Just spontaneous laughing at all times. The wonderfulness that is Sonita.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nobody notices that. The people from, I'm going to edit this out.
It's okay. It's okay.
So, yes.
So,
Pierre, what is his name? The
Bourdieu.
French guy? No, not the sociologist, the ethnographer who was at Penn. Like one of the most.
Yeah, Pierre Bourdieu. Oh, Philippe.
No. Thank you.
It's a condition so powerful. It may be that which holds the stars in the firmament.
That's what I feel in my heart.